In this video, we'll animate a basic walk cycle in Blender. First, we'll prep our Blender scene and character rig for animation. Then, we'll take a look at the structure of a walk cycle. After that, we'll learn how to keyframe poses and mirror them to speed up the process. After we finish animating the walk cycle, we'll make it loop seamlessly and make the character walk forward along a path. You can follow along using any character that's already rigged with IK. And if you want to make a character that's similar to mine, you can check out my low poly character series. Links in the description. To make my character rig easier to use, I created a curved circle and assigned it as the custom shape for the bones I want to pose. You can do that by selecting a bone and going to the Bone Properties tab, and assigning a custom shape. Below that, you can adjust the custom shape's translation, rotation, and scale. And for the bones I don't want to pose, I selected them and enabled this option to hide them. So let's get started. We're going to make this a 24-frame walk cycle. So let's go to the timeline and set the end frame to 24, and have it so the keyframes are set to linear interpolation by default. And before making any keyframes, I suggest setting the rotation mode on your bones to XYZ. This will make them easier to edit and manage in the graph editor. To apply the rotation mode to all of the bones, let's select them all by pressing A. Then right-click the rotation mode and click Copy to Selected. And also make sure that your transform orientation is set to local. Our animation will start on frame 1, but we'll keyframe our first pose on frame 0, because the first contact pose will be the exact same as the last one, and we don't want to have any duplicate frames. This chart shows us the 4 main poses you need for a single step of a walk: the contact, the down, the passing, and the up. Of course, this is only one half of a walk cycle, but fortunately we have the ability to mirror these keyed poses, saving us the time of having to pose the other side of the walk. Now let's go into pose mode and start moving and rotating these bones to make our first contact pose. It's helpful to look at the character from the side view. Let's move the hips down a bit so there's a slight bend in the knees. Move the right foot forward and the left foot back. Let's also move the arms down and position them so they're counterbalancing the legs. For the hands, we'll want to add a slight curl to the fingers. Let's select them and change the transform pivot point to individual origins. Then press R and Z in this case to curl them in. Once we're happy with the rotation, we can copy the pose by pressing Ctrl C, or you can find it in the pose menu here. Then we can select Paste Pose Flipped, or press Ctrl Shift V. To make the pose less stiff, let's also rotate the hips to follow the legs. Then we can select the torso and rotate it so it counters the hips and follows the arms. Let's also tilt the torso forward a little bit so the character is leaning in. Then rotate the head up so they're looking forward again. And we can use these controls to move the elbows. Let's move one of them and copy the pose by pressing Ctrl C. Then select Paste Pose Flipped or press Ctrl Shift V to make them symmetrical. You can also do the same thing for the knees if you want to adjust them. It can look a little bit unnatural if the feet are pointing directly forward like this, so let's rotate them to the side just a little bit. And once we're happy with our first contact pose, we can select all of the bones we moved and keyframe them by pressing K. We only want to keyframe the location and rotation, so let's select that. Then let's move to frame 24 and press K to insert the same keyframes again. Now that we have the beginning and the end keyframed, let's move to frame 12. Now with the same bone selected, let's copy the pose. And select Paste Pose Flipped. And make sure to keyframe it by pressing K and selecting Location and Rotation. Now we've established our contact poses. If we press play, we can see the character moving in a very simple way. Now it's all about adding the poses in between to make it look like a walk. Here in the transform panel, we can edit and remove unwanted values on our keyframes. Let's only focus on the first 12 frames, because the rest of it will be the exact same, just mirrored. The next key pose we'll work on is the passing pose, which will be directly in the middle of our first 2 contact poses. So let's move to frame 6. Here we'll move the right foot so it's flat on the ground and directly beneath the body. Then we can move the hips up and move the left leg forward so the knee is slightly passing in front of the right leg. Let's also break the symmetry of the arms and move them so they don't look so stiff. Make sure you keyframe all of the bones you move. Then we can copy them and move to frame 18 and press Ctrl Shift V to paste the mirrored pose. Then keyframe the location and rotation. Next, we'll work on the down pose. This will come in between our first contact pose and the passing pose. So go to frame 3. Let's make the foot flat so it's planted on the ground. And let's move the hips down because the character is putting weight on the foot. We can adjust the arms a little bit too. Then we'll add a keyframe to all of the moved bones, copy the pose by pressing Ctrl-C, then move to frame 15 and paste the pose flipped by pressing Ctrl-Shift-V. And don't forget to add keyframes. Now we can work on the last key pose, the up pose, which will be on frame 9. Here we'll need to add keyframes on the rotation of the toes. And we may need to add keyframes to straighten the toes before and after the bend. Then we need to move the hips up and try to match the pose in the chart. Then keyframe all of the bones we moved, copy the pose by pressing Ctrl-C, move to frame 21 and press Ctrl-Shift-V to paste the pose flipped, and insert keyframes on the location and rotation. Here I'm straightening the toes before and after the up pose. Now you have a basic rough walk cycle. If you want to make the animation more smooth, then you should open up the graph editor. Here we can adjust the curves to get better results. For example, if we select the hips and we isolate the Y rotation. Quick tip, a shortcut to solo things in the graph editor is to select something and press Shift-H. And to unhide everything, you press Alt-H. Now let's delete the keyframes that aren't on the contact poses. Now let's select these keyframes and change the interpolation. We can do that by pressing the T key. Then let's select Bezier interpolation. Now there should be some easing on the rotation of the hips. So let's also change the rotation on the torso to Bezier interpolation. I think for this type of character, the snappy animation you get from linear is actually okay. But it's up to you how you want to animate your walk cycle. Now what if you want this walk cycle to continue past the 24 frames? You could copy and paste the keyframes over and over again, but that's pretty tedious and not ideal if you want to make changes to the walk cycle. First, we have to make sure that all of our moving bones have keyframes on frame 0 and frame 24, and only within that range. Then let's select all of them. Go to the graph editor, unhide all of the curves, and select them all. If you don't see this modifiers panel, press N to show it. Then click Add a Modifier and find the Cycles modifier. Now everything should have a Cycles modifier, and our animation should loop seamlessly. Now let's make the character move forward along a path. And to make it more interesting, let's make the path turn and bend. Let's create a Bezier curve and change it to whatever path you want the character to walk in. For this to work, we want our character rig to be parented to some kind of control shape. So I just parented the character rig to a curved circle. Then give it a follow path constraint, and pick the Bezier curve we just made. Then check follow curve. You may need to change the forward axis so the character is facing the right way. Now let's increase the playback range on the timeline. I'm going to set the end frame to 96. Then you can select the curve path and go to the Data Properties panel, which is this green icon. Here we can add keyframes on the evaluation time to animate the character moving forward, and adjust the path duration by changing the frames number. Now we have a character moving along a path, and we still have the ability to change this path by editing the curve. Right now the head is looking pretty stiff. It would be better if we could independently control what direction it was looking in. Let's add an empty plane axis, and move it somewhere we want our character to be looking. Then let's select our rig and go into pose mode. Select the head bone and go to the bone constraint panel, and pick the track 2 constraint. And for the target, select the empty plane axis, and change the track axes until it's facing the right way. Now if we move this empty, we can control where the character is looking, even while they are walking along a path. Now our character is walking along a path with their head tracked to a plane axis, which we can also keyframe if we want to animate where the character looks. And we can easily go back and adjust both the walk cycle and the curve path they're following. So have fun and good luck with your walk animations. If you found this video useful, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments.